Emperor of China and the Sultan of Malacca. Another question of allegiance is that Hang Lipo was and there were a lot of debate, but this is the top one. My ancestor came with Hang Lipo, Hang Tua Jupat. When was yours? This was asked on this time. Now, again, this is reflective of what Professor Muhammad Haji Saleh was trying to imply in his statement, saying that look, things that can go haywire on the internet. Someone came up and defended Hang Tuah not being Chinese. They said whenever we speak about Hang Tuah, many history blind fools who claim that this famous Malay warrior is Chinese. In fact, they brought up points and information to further prove that Hang Tuah is Chinese. Thus, we write this article to rebut these ridiculous points and give you real facts about Hang Tuah. Well, this thing went on and on. You just go and Google information about Hang Tuah controversies, you get plenty of them. But interestingly, it all started off with this guy, John Chow. And John Chow, we don't know who he was. He could be among us here. But what happened was that it also got the authority worries, because what he did was to challenge the very essence of Malay identity, Malay ethos of warriors, of loyalty, and so on. And then suddenly, that hero is no longer a Malay, but could be a Chinese. So this was it, and it started a frantic kind of responses. And then they said, let us go and ask historians. They asked Hu Kim, Hang Tuah a Chinese? He said, actually, Hang Tuah was never existed. And of course, this became a very big issue. He said, oh, Hu Kim, we better move on and ask other people. They went and asked Muhammad Haji Saleh. Muhammad Haji Saleh said, Prof. Muhammad Haji Saleh said, look, all my life in my research, I always pointed out that Hang Tuah has been a myth. Again, there's no answer to what they wanted. And they went on to ask Farish Noor. Now, Farish Noor was once my classmate from 2 and from 3 in Nassau, Sabah. And Farish Noor, being the gentleman and very, diplomatic, he said, actually, he never existed. But we should emulate the values, the kind of bravery, the kind of loyalty that he embodied. Smart man, being a scholar. And finally, they came to Professor Ahmad Adam. Prof. Ahmad Adam said, no, it never existed. Let me show you. I've got a book to show you that it never existed. And you had frantic official response. Because of this, you get a response that was out of proportion. People began to organize forums, seminars, conferences, trying to make sense whether or not Hang Tuah existed. And then there was some people who went on and claimed that, look, I am the descendant of Hang Tuah. And others say, okay, let us find some empirical data. So the UPM, 2 scholars from UPM actually did some studies, and finally they traced the pepper trail to Okinawa, the islands of Okinawa in Japan. Okinawa formerly was called Ryukyu, the kingdom of Ryukyu, before it was annexed by the Japanese during the closing stages of 19th century. Now, Ryukyu maintained a cordial relationship with Malacca. So these people went over to Ryukyu or to Okinawa. They found in the temples or in some of the texts, they said, look, we found evidence of 3 letters written by a certain Laksamana in 1485 to the king of Ryukyu. 3 letters. There you are, evidence of the existence of Hang Tuah. Hang Tuah actually existed. But of course, we all know that Laksamana is a very generic term and mirror, leader of a military force. In fact, if you go to a place like Sabah or Sarawak, deep in the heartland of Sabah and Sarawak, where you can't find sea, you also have Datu Laksamana, the title for a native chief. Or you have a Raja Laksamana, another title for a native chief who have never seen a drop of sea water in his life, but he had that title. But nonetheless, the team came back to publish a book and launched by no less than the Deputy Prime Minister. And you can get that book in the bookstore. Now, the debate went on. Tun Ahmad Saji, the two chief ministers from Malacca, Prof. Nick, Sohaimi, all came out and said, yes, Hangtua actually existed. But you also have a big book there by Professor Ahmad Adam, who says that, look, it is antara sejarah dan mitos. Between history and myth, you have to make a distinction. So that's his idea. Now, if you look at this episode in our public discourse, you realize that this is something that is gone out of proportion. But started with one John Chow, right? We don't even know who he was or who he is. And somewhat the thing that he posted made such an impact. People began to spin. And this is the power of internet. This is the power of the netizens. And historians got to do something. Or at least we must know how to respond. So in conclusion, I'm sorry that I kept you on for such a long time, but let me conclude by saying that discourse on history in the public spheres in Malaysia is definitely gaining ground. And unless satisfactorily resolved, the issue on the teaching of history in school and the problematic textbooks will remain a leading topic in the public discourse on history. Less so the question about Hangtua. However, for many years, this discourse were limited by the space available, especially in the print media. But the proliferation of the internet and social media has provided a larger platform and space for the Malaysian public to engage in discourse on history. Yet, despite of this newfound space and many discussions on historical issues, there is a need to pose and ask how historians should respond to this major shift. How do we deal with this change, the rise of netizen historians? To engage, or should we ignore them? Well, my suggestion is that historians need to be sensitive to changes and discourse, and perhaps we should also engage. Historians should also continue to make history alive and relevant. We should actually make it alive, not just at this level, but to the public and also in schools. To engage by adapting to changes, including technological changes. Now, historians are pretty fast in adapting changes. I noticed that most of our historian friends are very fast in adapting to internet and all these online things. But we have to keep at it. We cannot be left behind. And most important of all, we should continue to safeguard the integrity of history education. We should improve the quality of research and teaching, and we should be sensitive to the concern of the society and nation. I would like to quote in my closing from Marc Bloch. So Marc Bloch belongs to the School of Annals, in the History School of Annals, French historian. He wrote this in 1940 in this book called The Strange Defeat, when he was trying to answer to the question as to why France lost the war during the summer of 1940. And he said, I quote, "For a man to form a clear idea of the needs of society and to make an effort to spread his views widely is to introduce a grain of heaven into the general mentality. By so doing, he gives himself a chance to modify it to some extent, and consequently, to bring some influence to bear upon the course of events that, in the last analysis, are dictated by human psychology. The real trouble with us, his professors, was that we were absorbed in our day-to-day talks. Most of us can say with some justice that we were good workmen. Is it equally true to say that we were good citizens?" So that's from Marc Bloch. Before I close, I would like to take this opportunity to thank a lot of people. Professor Wong for chairing the station. I know he's a very busy man, but we are happy that he could come and chair the session, and it is an honor. The Dean of our faculty, Associate Professor Dr. Hanafi Hussein, who is actually officially the host of our talk today. Encik Muhammad Khair Yunus, the Principal Assistant Registrar, and his team for making this possible. They did all the arrangements and so on. Dr. Evelyn Ko, the Director of International and Corporate Relations, and a team that helped to take the pictures, that helped to give a lot of the publicities and so on. Mr. Adam Wong of the Penabit UM and team, and my team from the History Department, the Institute of China Studies, and the Global Planning and Strategy Center for helping me to make this possible. Just last bit, by customary, we should publish a book that we should bring back. But somewhat, we would send it to you. So I would appreciate that if you could actually, on your way out, drop a card, a name card. We know we have your email address. That's how we reach most of you, actually. But we would appreciate if you could actually drop your name card or write your name on the attendance list with your address, postal address, so that we can actually send the booklet to you. That will be the text for today's lecture. So with that, I would like to once again thank all of you for taking time off to come and listen to this lecture, and I wish all of you well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Danny Wong. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call upon Professor Dr. Awang Bulkiba Awang Mahmud to conclude the lecture, which was delivered by Professor Dr. Danny Wong.
Thank you very much, Prof. Danny Wong. Now, I came from the science stream. Some of you may know that I eventually became a medical doctor. But before you say anything, one of my favorite subjects in school was actually history. And my least favorite subject, incidentally, was biology. Yeah, it's funny how things turn out. The thing about history is that, what fascinates me about history is that there are many lessons that we learn from history. Unfortunately, individuals and even entire nations tend to underestimate the value of the lessons of history. Hence, we see misadventures, for example, by countries in invading other countries, like, for example, Afghanistan. Just to give an example. Afghanistan is a country which has never been, which no country has ever been able to rule, invade successfully. The British tried it, and others tried it, the Russians tried it, and the Americans tried it, and everybody has left. So there are lessons in that kind of history, and yet people still fail to heed these lessons in history. Now, it's very interesting when you talk about Hikayat Hang Tuah. I was a very avid reader when I was a child. And I used to go to the library just about every other day during the school holidays. So I used to finish one book a day and go back to the library after 2 days, return the book, borrow another 2 books. And I read a lot of books about history, especially about the state of Sarawak, because that's where I come from. What I realized was when reading about the history, the historical perspective, it was told very much from the British point of view. I'm not saying that the facts are wrong, but of course the perspective, and I realized that it tended to contradict with what history that was taught in school. I also, incidentally, when I was about 9 years old, read the entire volume of Hikayat Hang Tuah. And that's about, 500 pages. I read it. And I came to the conclusion after reading the entire Hikayat Hang Tuah cannot be real. Because there was a lot of mythology in the very beginning. I was wondering, I mean, you can't be serious. We're talking about, in the way that they talk about the Majapahit Empire, the state, the kingdom came about. And it sounded very unreal to me. But anyway, so I came to the conclusion that it's either something wrong with the Angkor, or I should read it purely for literature and not for history, or as a historical fact. Now, interestingly, I would classify us, those of us who are about 50 or 50 plus now, as having had two phases in our life, BI and AI. What's BI? What's AI? BI is before internet. So AI is after internet. When did this internet thing start in Malaysia? I think jaring was introduced in 92, perhaps in early 90s. I registered my first email address in 96. There was a Hotmail address which I still maintain to this very day. My jaring email address has died now with jaring. Jaring is very gone out of business. Now, before internet, public discourse was very limited for us. Public discourse meant that you had to sit in a room like this and then put up your points and so on and so on. And there were a lot of, some would call it establishment censorship, some would call it self-censorship, because a lot of us don't want to upset other people, so we censor ourselves and we don't say what we should be saying. But after the internet came to view, now people started setting up websites, personal websites. I didn't want to set up a personal website. I thought it was quite crazy to set up a personal website. And then when blogs became a fashion, people put in blogs. But of course, blogs, although there's feedback that you can give, but you can always delete the comments which people give, and you can moderate the comments. It was a selective kind of dialogue, whereas personal websites tend to be a monologue. Nobody could respond. But social media changed. And with social media and with the availability of apps and the mobile internet that we know nowadays, the volume of public discourse has increased exponentially. With it, of course, things happen, like Prof. Danny Wong has said. Sometimes things tend to be emotional, they can be inflammatory, and could be attributed to bigotry. Is this good or is this bad? We are at a stage of development in Malaysia where I would say we are somewhere in the teenage years. Yes, suddenly we realize that we are growing up very quickly. We have certain freedoms which are allowed to us. And sometimes we do not really know how to put this or do this in a more mature manner. For those of us who are in the 5th decade of life, or the 6th decade of life rather, then we realize that, yes, with freedom comes responsibility too. And inflaming others perhaps may not be the wisest thing to do. It sounds very much like a teenager ranting at not being recognized or not being allowed to speak their mind, or people not understanding. Yet, this is a stage that I believe that we must pass through, because in a nation's development, the ability to discuss in a coherent manner, in a calm manner, is very important. We do not want to go and experience what certain states have experienced, which suddenly found great freedom, very suddenly, and an inability to handle that freedom. And we have seen states fracture as a result of that. So where are we in the public discourse? Public discourse, I believe, should be encouraged. Public discourse will go through a stage where we will become more rational, we will become, hopefully, more accepting, not tolerant, but accepting of others' views, and be able to work out what is reasonable and what is not reasonable. So I think, in my mind, this has been a very interesting inaugural lecture. And certainly, I was quite intrigued that there is a Universitas Hang Tuah, so I learned something very new today. There's a Sekolah Tinggi Kesihatan, Hang Tuah. And that's related to my own field. So I was thinking, my God, is that medical school or public health school called Hang Tuah, which I know absolutely nothing about, and it appears to be in Indonesia of all countries. It's not even in Malaysia. It's been a very interesting inaugural lecture. And I believe this might provoke, again, discussions about public discourse. And I think this is a healthy thing to have. So with this, I'm sure you will agree with me that we had a most interesting and illuminating inaugural lecture today. And so please join me in thanking Prof. Danny Wong for his lecture.
Thank you, Professor Awang Bulgiba Mahmud, for sharing this lecture. Indeed, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the management of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, International Corporate Relations Office ICR, all members of the University Malaya, and our guests for your time and continuous commitment. With this, we have reached to the end of the lecture. Everyone is invited for refreshments served at the Dataran Sastra. Once again, thank you for making this morning a successful and memorable one. Have a pleasant day. Thank you.